Welcome back to another episode of the Rise Over Run podcast. I am Doug. This is Brant, and we talk about all things related to startups. And today, we are talking about why do companies break? And specifically, to give a little bit of insight into what's happening at Remy right now, our company very regularly breaks about every quarter. And it's like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean it breaks? What I mean by that is certain parts of the business stop working. And that can look like, hey, we were getting a lot of value out of this set of meetings that we were having, seemed to be creating value, no longer creating value. This communication method was working really well, no longer is working. This system for hiring was working really well, it's not working anymore. And various different things break at different times. Brant, why does everything break? Why does this happen?
I think there's a bunch of reasons. The first one that kind of comes to mind is like we make a bunch of assumptions up front about how the world's gonna look over the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. We do these planning sessions. We put these lists together that's like, here's our goals and here's how we get there. And, you know, you're only right, well, I don't know, half the time, 3/4 of the time, it feels like.
Half the time feels generous,
Yeah.
sometimes.
But in the course of, you know, setting out to go do those things, you make assumptions that require us to like kind of put a stake in the ground. We got to go hire X amount of people in certain positions. We form the positions in a certain way. We go build certain products as a result to like support the goals as we see them. And for every time that we miss, there's some kind of like, I don't know, stacking of problems or stacking of things that we just misjudged that, I don't know, it seems to kind of like stack up. And then at some point, like over the course of 3, 4, 5 months, it just like all grinds to a halt. Like we can't ignore that we've like misaligned in a certain way and we have to pivot again.
I think I want to just drill in a little bit around this thing that you just said, which is we can't ignore. My experience is that most companies do ignore the fact that this stuff is breaking or that something is not working correctly. I was at lunch with one of our teammates yesterday, and he mentioned to me that he said, I've never been a part of a team where there is no backbiting like this. And that stood out to me as something that was like pretty unique. And I think it works back from the ability to one, acknowledge the problems that you do have, and a willingness to say it out loud, and then an ambition to actually want to work on the problem. And so I think one of the things that's standing out to me is I think about like, why does stuff break? Entropy is the natural state of affairs. Like things degrade over time. That's true in software, that's true in buildings, that's true in health, etc. They have to be kept up. Just because this is not, that you're not fixing problems the way we're talking about doesn't mean stuff isn't breaking. It probably almost assuredly is.
It definitely is easier to, you know, feel things are not working as they once were, and as problems come up, almost. What I think happens actually is people see the problems, they either ignore them, or the worst outcome is it's like a problem happens and then let's like go build guardrails around how we don't ever make that happen again. And you build a whole company off of like guarding against anything wrong happening ever. And more or less that just leads to like, you know, more process, more check-ins, more approvals, more committees, more all of those things that just make everything move more slowly. So that no one ever has to feel like stress or pain. The alternative is it is actually painful. Like, I don't know, right now we're dealing with increased team size. We added 14 people this month. And then I think the stat is like 70% of the company's only been here like 6 months or something like that. So like no one knows anything.
Everyone's new.
Yeah. No one has deep context on anything is maybe a better way to put it. And for us to go re-engineer big parts of the company to like fill in the gaps here to solve this problem, it's like a lot of extra time. It's like working late, it's working weekends, it's trying to tell a lot of people that they have to like change the way that they have always been doing things, and they get grumpy, and there's just a lot of hard things to go deal with. And so if you're, I don't know, maybe if you're like conflict averse or lazy or whatever, why deal with all this stuff? Like, the company probably won't burn down overnight if you don't fix these things, but in the aggregate, it leads to, I don't know, just a company that doesn't really produce things very quickly.
Yes. As each node in a network is added, so each employee that you add into the team, it grows the communication channels quadratically. And so, when you add a person, the complexity is not linear. And so what was working really well probably won't work at the next phase. And so when we say it's broken, it doesn't mean that the company is falling apart. What it means is you're not getting the results that you want out of the function that you are currently running.
Yep.
And for us, what that means is, as a company that's trying to grow multiple hundreds of % a year currently, you kind of have to try to stay ahead of the game, and requires you to kind of reinvent yourself. And I was on a call this morning with an enterprise partner of ours, all of which every single attendee on that call had been with the company over 20 years. And it was actually very humbling. I was like, man, the bulk of the team in our all hands meeting hadn't been with the company 20 weeks.
Yeah.
And so not only is the problem set that you're trying to work on, the solutions that you're coming up with brand new, but the people's familiarity, their context, their understanding of the problem sets are all very new as well, and requires you to be constantly vigilant in being willing to evaluate the problem and come up with new solution sets. So like all that is like this like spinning chaos. So how do you deal with it? How do you think about this?
I'm kind of regularly taking a step back, and I'm thinking about, where we're trying to go in the long term, and then breaking it down. And it's like, okay, how do we think we make progress towards that in any given quarter, let's say? And if I look back on previous quarters, it's like, 1, are we hitting our company goals? 2, am I getting what I want out of my own team even? Like, can I, at increasing levels of scale, get predictability across, building quality designs, shipping quality code, like building products that actually solve the business problems?
That we don't have to re-architect 60 days after we launch them.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of signals that pop up over time that some of this stuff is not scaling. And I think in the course of doing that, you have to like make changes, and some of like, we're dealing with some of this exact stuff right now, where it's like, hey, we built this tool to increase efficiency of our team, and we just like missed on the assumptions that we used to build it. Or we built this way to automatically ingest quotes from one of our partners, and it just like keeps breaking all the time. And like, even though we've put these projects together that are supposedly going to like fix it once and for all, it's just not happening. And so it's this really tricky balance because I think the first instinct is swing down and get in everyone's business across like the most minute of details. Maybe said another way, like I could review every single code push that goes into our app. And as a result, I would slow everything down because we're shipping 30 code pushes a day. We wouldn't be able to do that anymore. Finding the balance here is like really, really hard. So, I'm trying to find my like middle ground for this right now is something like I'm going to go review 20% of the code pushes. So it's not like slow down the entire team, but it's me getting in the weeds more than I have been recently. Formulate the opinions of what I'm seeing. Like, what are the patterns across the code base that in the aggregate are leading us to the bad outcomes? And then how do I make sure that, the tech leads that we have, which are ultimately the ones responsible for making sure that we have good code, how do I make sure that they like enforce and promote good principles that I'm like learning about by swimming around in the details? So finding like some middle ground like that is generally what I'm after when I'm trying to like re-architect these things.
I think me providing a specific example as to how I am thinking about this and how I'm trying to solve it. It's being a CEO is a very humbling thing because ultimately everything is your fault. And when you actually come to grips with that and find peace there, you're like, okay, it just is. And what that means is when things aren't working well, it's my fault every single time. And so what that requires, and what I have learned doing this job now for a very short period of time, is that my job is to try to provide clarity at every single step that I possibly can. One of the things that is a clear sign of chaos in our organization right now is I feel like there are things that happen in the organization that I never knew about, which is like the first time that happens, you're like, wait, what? How did that, how? But it happens pretty much every day. And that bidirectionally, both from our frontline employees all the way up to me, and then from me all the way down to frontline employees, communication lines are not clear. And so one of the things that we kind of re-architected this week is I was holding my staff meeting on Wednesdays. And there's like real reasons, good reasons to do that. It gives my team a chance to digest the following week, get our data prepared, and have really clear discussions. The problem is once we make decisions as my staff, everything flows downstream of that. And so we moved my staff meeting to Monday this week so that we could begin to disseminate information earlier in the week to the rest of the organization. That may not seem like a big deal. It's a week. But weeks at Remy feel like months or even quarters at other companies when you're growing at the speed at which we're growing. And so it requires you to like really take advantage of every single week. And if we lose that time, we never get it back. And so this is just like a small tweak that we're making as a very specific example of like, how do we deal with the chaos, pull the work forward in the week so that it can disseminate quicker down into the organization.
Right after we did this tweet went out from Egan McCabe, who I think he was the CEO of Intercom.
Or Intercom,
yeah.
That's right.
Very well respected, and like Intercom, probably from 2014 to like 2021 was like one of the product-focused companies to go look at. Like, how do they do things that everyone patterned after? And his tweet after we made all these changes is just like, I think the best companies ignore all of this stuff. No one-on-ones, no staff meetings, no reporting, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, there's, 1,000 people in the comments like, yeah, like cheering it on. I always find those kinds of like Twitter interactions sort of interesting about why someone that built a 5,000 person company, I don't know how big Intercom is. It's like, is all of a sudden like saying something like that? What do you think?
I was having a discussion with an investor yesterday about this exact thing. Look, Remy's a very fast-growing company, and we don't have that many people. We have 80 people. It's a very small headcount still. And you're more and more on Twitter, you're hearing like, this company got to this much run rate revenue with this many employees, and the employee count is like, actually, we have no people here. We're all just computers.
Yeah.
Is like, that's the next version of this.
Yeah.
Like to get to like the meme level. And I'm growing increasingly skeptical because company building is very, very hard when it's durable. Contrast that, I listened to a podcast with the Collison brothers this week. And, that business grew. They wrote an annual letter this morning. Did you read it? Did you see it?
No.
They did 1.4 trillion last year. The company grew 38% last year, which means, and they have business units inside of Stripe now that are over $500 million in net revenue. And they have 10,000 employees. And I know this because their former COO wrote a book called Scaling People that's very structured. In that book, Claire, the first time she sat down, or early on when she joined Stripe at like a couple hundred employees, she sat down and talked to Patrick, their CEO, about saying, and she said, we need an LMS and a CMS. This is in the book. And he asked, well, what's an LMS and a CMS? Good question for a company that, he was probably
800, 900 people then?
No, it was less. It was like 300 people.
Okay.
And he was probably like 23 years old.
Yeah.
He was very young. That is not how they run things at Stripe now. In fact, they're very programmatic about defining their values, their mission, their strategy. There are no bigger students than John and Patrick about how company structures. John talked about it this week on the podcast about GM or functional businesses and understanding which of those business types and how these businesses organize themselves. So I get very skeptical of like, yeah, just run and gun, baby. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I want to be very clear that this isn't just happening. There's like deep sleepless nights thinking about structure, the type of people that we hire, how we organize them, who reports to who and why should they? Not just because it makes them feel good, but because there are really good reasons of like, should I align the entire revenue organization together? And that includes sales and marketing and customer success. And for us, like quoting, or basically like the way we like write our margins and our revenue stack. Should they be all under one functional leader? Should we organize the direct-to-consumer channel as a GM-focused business? We're talking about territory management. Well, should the territory managers run everything as it relates to that business? Should they oversee every single part of it? Or should compliance and quoting run functionally in parallel to them? This doesn't just happen, and I'm very, very skeptical that companies that don't care or pay attention to it can just magically create incredible results out of thin air. That's my response. Maybe I'm full of it and I'm an incompetent leader, but I just don't believe that that's true.
Whenever I hear this, I have the same reaction. Like the other one that goes around Twitter all the time is we run the whole company off text message, one text message thread. It's like, cool, how many people?
Yep.
20, 30? Even at that, it seems...
I'm skeptical.
It seems like wasted efforts, but if you ask people for examples of like truly durable companies that have pulled this off, they're exactly zero. I've dug in pretty deep here on some of these claims. Like the ones that come up all the time are Valve. Valve got kind of lucky on an early product and rolled out this like, no org structure, no rules, do whatever you want kind of thing that they've had to since revive and go back on a lot of stuff. And haven't really shipped anything super meaningful in like 15 years. There's basically these very long gaps of time where like nothing really happens, and then they decide to like spin up a thing and then float along. You have companies like the other one that comes up all the time, especially with like small number of people doing a big thing, is WhatsApp. It's like, okay, if you hit a moment in time where one of the largest companies in the world, Facebook, happens to need your thing, they'll pay a premium for it. Cool, you got there. You hit the timing right. They did something great with a small number of people. But that's not an example of a durable company. They sold to Facebook. And now they do all of this stuff that, that we're talking about. So I think it is interesting. And I get why, even someone like Egan is like promoting this kind of stuff. I think he's probably just tired of doing it, is like the real answer, because it's annoying.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, I do think speed is a choice and matters a lot.
Yeah.
And so what I'm not saying is that process is a gift. It's rarely that. I'm not trying to add bureaucracy or unneeded layers of complication. But I also do think, I also am thinking about another example as a small company that's growing very quickly that I greatly respect, even though they believe very different things than we do, which is PostHog. I think about them, and every single decision that they have made about how they're building their company is intentional. So I do think lots of different systems can work. I'm not saying you have to have lots of people or lots of bureaucracy. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is the choices that you make and why you decide to make them need to be on purpose. They're just like, oh yeah, we can just manage this like off a whim on text message. No, you can't. Not at scale. Not if you want to build a very durable business, you can't. But that doesn't mean you can't build autonomous systems that are very intelligent, that decrease the amount of friction that both your employees and customers have to face every day to interact with your business. But you have to attack the actual problems as with intention and on purpose. That's it. And then hopefully, and I think this is what Brian Chesky was talking about with Founder Mode, with speed. And I'm making some changes organizationally, structurally at the company right now, and I don't want to wait a month. I want to do it right now. And I want to ask the question, why can't we just do it? So I do think there are two sides to the coin here. You don't have to have bureaucracy and process, but you better be doing it with intention, and you better be clear communicating how and why you're doing the change when all these things are breaking.
I think another thing I think about a lot of why all this stuff breaks is, this is maybe like a nerdy way of putting this, but there's this paradox called Bonini's paradox, and basically it's like, if you think about looking at a map, if you had a 1-for-1 scale map of the Earth, it is the most useful map from the standpoint of having fidelity, because it's perfect scale. But it's not actually useful because I can't carry around a 1-for-1 map in my pocket. It wouldn't fit. So you're kind of trying to always play this game, if I'm applying it to business, of how far out can I zoom and still maintain consistent outputs from the inputs that we're putting in, and knowing where to kind of, place yourself in that sense is really hard. And I think what I find for myself a lot of times is we'll get so focused and in the weeds on, a set of things that I realize I'm too far zoomed in, and then you zoom out and you're oh, I'm ignoring this whole other piece of the business over here, and I need to recalibrate so to speak, and figure out how to set up the right like proxies for success that allow me to kind of span across more and more and more things over time.
Okay, so what are the signals that you can look for if you're working in a company and you're like, is this broken? So number one, when has this ever happened at Remy? Who owns this? Hey, Brant, who owns this? Has that ever happened to us before?
I think in the last 3 weeks, it's probably come up like 20 times.
Yes. So if that is unclear, you probably have some type of broken process or not clear lines of delegation, et cetera, that you need to go fix. This is my worst nightmare coming true. But basically, at scale, at former companies that I've worked for, I would get on these calls, and I'm not kidding you, there would be 90 people on the call. 88 people don't talk. And someone with the title of program manager would get on the call and walk people through a 30-page deck for 30 minutes. And the entire purpose of the call was probably something that we could have done in 2 minutes had we just had some type of like clear communication channels between the actual stakeholders.
Yep.
So another signal that something is broken, what used to take 2 minutes now takes 30 minutes and 90 people on a call.
Mm-hmm.
How can you tell from customers that things are broken?
You kind of start getting a different type of response, like when you solicit feedback, or they, maybe you don't solicit it. And I think like there's a tone shift that happens from like, your company is the best and you're always so helpful and all that type of stuff to, complaints like we're having some of these problems, show up in issues with small little issues that it's like we, left some garbage on someone's driveway, for example, or, didn't properly like pick up after ourselves after a job. And I think that it starts with that type of stuff. And then if you don't really like get ahead of it, it just kind of starts going further and further and downhill until way worse things happen.
How about this one? We actually did this yesterday. You have more Slack channels than employees. That's a humbling thing to think about.
Yep.
We're not there yet. But we did look. We have 57 Slack channels. And by the way, you're like, what's the Bifrost. You're like the guy in Asgard in the movie Thor that has like the big sword.
I have no idea.
That protects. It basically, like, nobody gets to create a Slack channel at Remy. Brant is the only one. You are the only one that is allowed to create that channel. Even still, we have 57 Slack channels with 85 employees. That's a humbling thing to think about. But these communication channels, they tend to like spawn offshoots very, very, very quickly. The other thing that is really signaling to me that if I had one hope for what AI can achieve for Remy over the next 24 months, it would be for us to reduce the amount of software that we buy. And if someone comes in and says, oh, we should buy this software tool that can fix this problem for us, first of all, it's a lie. Don't get sucked into the trap. But second of all, it's probably a signal that you've got a problem that you need to go address.
You're saying like, I think the signal is there's a problem and you cycle through like 4 or 5 different pieces of software to try and solve it. And so like the signal that you have a problem is someone saying like, this is the one, trust me, like this will finally solve our problem.
The software is not going to solve the problem. Yeah. You have a structural problem that you need to go solve.
Yeah.
And there is no magical piece of software that's going to solve that problem for you.
This is somewhat of a tangent, but I was researching office spaces last night, and it's kind of interesting to think about the world pre-software. One of the offices that came up was Frank Lloyd Wright created like the office of the future in 1938. And if you think about like, pre-computers, like kind of what you're optimizing the space around, it's these clumps of desks surrounded by file cabinets, and that's a pod. And everyone learned these very like complex file systems, and there is a way to do all of this without software, period. I think software most of the time gives you speed, but like, I don't know, I know like quite a lot of people that still track all of their to-do lists off of a piece of paper. I still find it helpful to go like write a lot when I'm trying to think through things. Like no, product strategy software is gonna like magically fix the business, or task management software or whatever it is. Sometimes you just get stuck in this loop of, a great sales pitch from a software company solving all of your problems.
I will say a strong solution set that I would say I'm like right in the middle of living. Get offsite. Disconnect a little bit from the business. Get offsite for a day or two with your team and just be brutally honest with each other about some of the things that everyone is facing. When you come out of that offsite, you're probably not going to have clarity yet. I didn't. And then I took a couple of days. We happened to be in New York last week for not as just a way to like decompress. It was not that, but it did give me a chance to just completely disconnect from the business for 2 days. And the amount of clarity that I got from that experience, just being able to like deeply focus in on the problems you talk about the map, zooming all the way out, focus on very, very high level problems, and then completely letting go for 2 days, provided me a level of clarity to go work on the problems that I don't think would have been possible had I just come into the office every day. The whole like boiling a frog thing, where that is true, you just kind of get numb to like putting up with things that you don't really even see as problems. And then when you disconnect a little bit, you're like, wait a minute, that is not what I wanted to do.
Yeah, it's like if you live in a city for your whole life and you go somewhere else for, a vacation, you realize like over the course of 20 years, your city like turned into this place with horrible crime and poop all over the streets, and you just kind of feel like that's normal. And then you go to a clean city and you're like, oh, it doesn't have to be this way.
It doesn't have to be this way. All right, well, congratulations. More than likely, your company is broken. So you probably need to go fix it or fix some portion of it. And especially if you're growing fast, which hopefully you are, and hopefully that's your goal. That is an ambitious and what I would call a noble goal, is to go grow the company. And hopefully there's some of this stuff that resonated, and some things in here that you found at least you could apply or even get on board with. And we will catch you guys on the flip.